Hi, everyone. Welcome to Thanks for Sharing. I am your host, Jackie Pack, and just one announcement that I have. I don't know if it's really an announcement, but one maybe item of business or something I just want to put out there. So I'm not sure if I've said this before, but I have had a YouTube channel. Our company, Healing Paths Recovery, has had a YouTube channel for, several years now. And we haven't really done much with it. We did put some videos out of people who were on the team at the time. Some people have left, some people have joined, but we did some videos, some professional videos, back when we started the YouTube channel. And I want to say it was like 2018 or 19, probably 2019. I think it was definitely before the pandemic. And I hadn't done much with it since then. And I have been doing more with it. So I have been putting the video recording of each of these podcasts onto the YouTube channel, as well as some little clips from each video that I record as an episode. And so you can check that out. And then there's also, I'm going to start doing little shorts, just, random ideas I have that relate to therapy. I have a couple of quotes I've been collecting that I want to talk about. Again, they're going to be short, but I'm going to be putting more content on the YouTube channel. And what I really would appreciate is if you go to the YouTube channel and hit subscribe, hit like, different things like that, because part of my goal for the rest of the year, I know we're like halfway through the year. Can you believe that? I want to be able to build up subscribers on my YouTube channel and just be able to put more out there in terms of the YouTube platform. So if you haven't checked us out on YouTube, it's under Healing Paths, PATHS, and check that out and hit the subscribe button, hit some of the like buttons so that I can start building an algorithm and start analyzing the data and know what to tweak and know what to add and know what gets a lot of likes. So anyway, if you could do me that favor, I really appreciate it. So, okay, let's get into today's podcast episode. So this is going to be somewhat vulnerable for me. So I'm going to, like I do with most Patreon podcast episodes, I'm going to start off, and you can have this episode on, the different platforms where you find podcast episodes. And then I am going to put the rest of it in Patreon. Again, just there's some vulnerability that's coming up in this podcast episode. So I'm going to put the rest into the Patreon. If you are not a Patreon member and you would like to be, go ahead and head over to the Patreon app. Look for Thanks for Sharing. I think it's no spaces in between the words. Thanks for Sharing. A little tab with my picture on it will show up, and you can select your membership tier. And I'm going to be putting, again, some of the shorts, some polls I want to start. So if you want to check out the rest of this episode, head over to the Patreon app and become a member. Okay, so let's get into this episode today. So last month was my birthday. And, I wasn't sure when I was going to record this episode and post it. So, it could be some time out from my birthday. It's been over a month since I had my birthday. My birthday is May 11th. And this year, I gained some insight as I was talking with my kids that I thought I would share as we're talking about needs and wants in this podcast episode. Now, I think I've mentioned before in different episodes that several years ago, maybe like 6 or 7 years ago, as my birthday was approaching, my kids were asking for ideas that I would want for my birthday. And it was pretty typical for me to respond with, what are my options? Now, this particular year, after I had responded this way, one of my daughters looked at me and said, "Mom, that is such a weird response. Your options are whatever you want them to be." And it kind of took me back for a minute. Like, I mean, not just for a minute. I would say it took me back. I've thought about it a lot on the year since that happened. Just that concept that, like, I don't know, 7 years ago, I would have been my mid 40s, maybe my later 40s. Again, I just had a birthday. And so as I was thinking about it, it just occurred to me, like, I'm in my late 40s and I am still stuck in this approach to needs and wants that was formed during the formative years of my life. And I was not even aware of that. So the insight that I gained at that time, 6-7 years ago, as I reflected on my growing up years, was, based on the financial struggles that my parents had, I had really learned to suppress my wants. Instead of asking for what I wanted, I would try to assume what limits were in place and then choose from within those limits. And, to be honest, I was often disappointed. For example, I had to be somewhat young, maybe 4th or 5th grade, and Christmas was coming up. And I knew my mom would be doing Christmas shopping. And I just had kind of this dread about this same chain of events that had happened for the past several years about to repeat. And so I made a decision at that point to interrupt this chain of events that really wasn't working for anyone. It wasn't working for me. It really wasn't working for my mom. So I went to my mom and asked her if I could go shopping with her when she was buying my Christmas gifts so I could pick them out. That was pretty brave of me because I was risking hurting my mom's feelings. But the reality is we both knew that what she bought me, I was not happy with. It's not really what I wanted. I would try to pretend I was happy or grateful about it, but she would notice. I would put it in my drawer and I would never wear it. I would never use it. And it was just a waste of money. And she would feel bad. At some point, she would notice that I had never worn whatever, she had bought me, and she'd ask me about it. Like, oh, how come you've never worn this outfit or this top or whatever that I got you for Christmas? And I'd kind of, be like, oh, I forgot about that. But I never wore it, and she knew that. So again, this year was a little bit different, and I mustered up this courage to try to intervene in this chain of events. So after I made this proposal, my mom responded by reflecting that if I went with her to pick out my gifts, there's not going to be any surprises on Christmas morning. And, she was just kind of like, you don't want to be surprised on Christmas morning? Now, what I didn't say was that surprises really aren't that great when it's not something you want or like. Instead, I think I said something along the lines of just reminding my mom that, I was just really picky about what I liked, which, that had been said about me. So I just kind of used that. I think my older sister and my mom had said things like that to me, like, you're just so picky. And so I just was like, I'm just so picky. And I don't want you to feel bad that I don't like something, or I'm not going to use it, or I won't wear it, whether that was clothing or shoes, which, would make you feel bad. I was telling her, like, you always feel bad. And it's also a waste of money. And I know we don't have a lot of money. And this way, I'm going to like what I'm getting, and you'll be happy and I'll be happy, and no money gets wasted. So, took that courage, and my mom agreed to my proposal. So at that point on, I would always go shopping with her to pick out my Christmas gifts, my birthday gifts. Those were probably only 2 times a year that I got gifts, but I would go and pick out what I wanted. Now, even with this agreement, I wouldn't go outside what my perceived limits were. Like, I would never have asked, for example, for a pair of skis. Never. Even though several of my friends got those things for Christmas, they would get a pair of skis, they would get the whole outfit, and they'd get a pass. And I just knew that was way too much money for what my parents could spend per kid. And so I never asked for something like that. I knew that, even my big gift was relatively small compared to some of what the things my friends were getting. So I knew from a fairly young age that my needs and my wants had to be somewhat suppressed. Maybe not all the way, like I had intervened in this way of me being able to go pick out what I wanted and what I liked. But I also knew, it couldn't be exactly what I wanted or needed. It couldn't be at this end of the continuum. It had to be more at this end of the continuum. And so, my wants and needs were really, they had these limits or boundaries placed around them just based on the situation of my family. And, maybe that's not a bad thing in general. I know there's several of you out there listening to this who are like, yeah, me too. Like my parents couldn't afford a lot of things. And so I had to suppress my wants and needs. And that's not, exactly what I'm saying. I'm not saying that all good parents can afford to give their kids really nice things. I'm not saying that. But there's a bigger picture, and this is part of it, right? So I'm giving you this context, but it also is bigger than that. And, my husband and I have limits that we place around each of our kids for Christmas or for their birthday. Actually, we've stopped doing Christmas gifts and instead we go on a vacation, which, to be honest, is probably way more expensive than buying them Christmas gifts. And we really enjoy going and spending time together. Usually we go someplace warm and with a beach, and we have some great memories that we're building. So I would rather spend my money on building memories. And, they get things throughout the year. It's not like they only get gifts at Christmas or they only get gifts on their birthday. But, a lot of families have to place those limits around what they can afford during the holidays or around birthdays or different things like that. So I think I've mentioned this before on the podcast too. The summer after I finished sixth grade, and I was going to be starting junior high school. So in where I lived, and this isn't how it is where I live currently, but it was this way when my kids were going through school. So sixth grade, I know for some people, sixth grade was part of middle school. And for me, sixth grade was part of elementary school. Then you did junior high in seventh, eighth, and ninth grade, and then high school. So I was going to be starting junior high, and my mom mentioned it was around the last day of school. And she just mentioned to me that, whatever school clothes I was going to want to buy for the start of the next year, for the start of the next school year, I would need to earn money to buy them because my parents couldn't afford to keep paying for the older kids' clothes when they had 4 kids younger than me. And like I said, I've talked about this before. So it was like the last day of school. I think it was like a Friday. And I was over at my friend's house that lived on the street behind my house, west of my house. And, I was complaining to her. It was just her and I in this room in her house. And I was complaining to my friend about this. And her mom overheard our conversation. And her mom came into the room and said she thought this was a great idea. And she thought that my friend should do the same thing. Now, my friend's family was not financially stressed the way my family was. So you can imagine the look on my friend's face when her mom made this announcement. And then her mom added, Jackie, why don't you come to our house Monday morning, be here at 6 a.m., and I will tell you both how you can make money over the summer to buy school clothes before the start of the next school year. Well, I had no better options. In fact, I had no idea how I was supposed to make money to buy my clothes. So the first day of summer break, that next Monday, I showed up bright and early, 6 a.m. at my friend's house, and her mom taught us how to make homemade bread. And we made, so many loaves of bread. Fortunately, she did have a Bosch mixer, which makes bread making, so much easier. So we made so many loaves of wheat bread and white bread. And then once we finished baking the loaves, she had bought in bread bags and the twist ties, all of that type of stuff that we would need. She had all the ingredients ready. So once we had finished baking the bread, we had to clean up the kitchen. We bagged all the loaves up, got them ready. We loaded them into my younger brother's wagon, and we would just go door to door selling loaves of bread. And at that time, we sold them for $1 a loaf. And we did this Monday through Friday, and we would make around 56 loaves of wheat and white combined each day. Now, eventually we got standing orders, so we didn't have to go door to door, and we would fill the orders each day and then go deliver them once we had finished baking everything and cleaned up the kitchen. So then each Friday would come, we would add up all the money we had made that week. And then, my friend's mom would sit down with us and she'd go, through the list of everything that she had bought, the supplies, the ingredients, all that type of stuff. And we would go through that list. We'd have to pay her back. She didn't have any markup on what she was charging us. She just wanted to be reimbursed. So we would pay her back, and then the two of us would split the profits of what was left. And at the end of the summer, when it came time for me to go buy my school clothes, of course, my mom took me school shopping, and I was picking out the clothes I wanted. And my mom would offer her suggestions like, Jackie, if you buy the store brand jeans, you could get 4 pair of jeans. Whereas if I bought the Levi Strauss that I wanted to buy, I could probably only get maybe 2 pair of jeans. And of course, I bought the 2 pair of jeans, the Levi Strauss, right? Or she would make the suggestion that I could get 2 or 3 pairs of shoes if I bought just a store brand, but only 1 if I bought the Nike. And I, of course, bought the Nike. Now, my mom would tell me, you're probably going to regret your decisions, but, she was willing to let me learn the hard way. And I have to say, I never did regret my purchasing choices. And I learned that it was me that needed to take care of my wants and my needs. Okay, let me grab this little. So I want to read here one of my favorite books, where the author talks about wants and needs, is Pia Melody's book, Facing Codependence. I think I've talked about this book on the podcast before, but let me read this part. She talks about, this is on page 71. She says, quote, children have to rely on other people to get their primary survival needs met. They also need others to satisfy their wants. To keep things simple, I don't need to read that part. So let me just read that again. Children have to rely on other people to get their primary survival needs met. They also need others to satisfy their wants. And then skipping over to page 73. She talks about children learn about basic being and doing by direct hands-on exchange and specific communication between them and their parents. We learn what wants bring us joy in life by a trial and error method. Children develop wants for non-survival things in life, such as toys, ice cream, certain kinds of shoes to wear to school, and so on. But when the wants are granted, the children learn whether they really were important wants or not. They can tell by the amount of pleasure or satisfaction they experience when their want is granted. And so they develop preferences for certain brands of soft drinks, breakfast cereals, clothing, movies, and so on. And later they apply this procedure to big things, to big wants that may change their whole lives and take them in a different direction. Wants regarding career, marriage, parenthood, and so on. So for me, right, I'm learning that my family can't really provide for my wants. And if I want things, it's up to me to provide for my wants. And I also learned that if I prioritized my wants, it would come at a cost. Not like, it's not that I regretted it, but there were comments made about me in my family because I did care about name brands. I did care about those things. And I don't think that's right or wrong at that age. Well, I don't care about those things. I like those things today in my life. So that hasn't necessarily changed, but I don't care about it maybe in the same way that I did when I was 12 and starting junior high. So this pattern continued through my teen years and well into my adulthood. I earned my own money. I bought what I wanted and what I needed. And looking back, I do think my mom felt some shame about not being able to provide for my wants or my needs. And I mean, I don't even know about my dad. I don't think my dad actually experienced shame. I think he was quite a shameless person. I don't even know if my dad knew I was making my own money at 12. I don't believe he ever felt bad about not providing for wants and needs. In fact, I'm going to go a little bit on a tangent here. I remember a time when I was younger, maybe second grade, my parents were fighting because my mom had told my dad that our school lunch accounts were empty and she needed money to put into our lunch accounts. Now, I was young enough that at that time, I think only my older sister and I were in school. Maybe the brother just under me, the sibling just under me, maybe he was in kindergarten, but kindergartners didn't eat school lunch back then. So I think it was just me and my sister, and we had the lunch cards or whatever, and we had an account that we had money in the account. Our parents had to put money in the account. I think this was before you could do the like today you can do, you can make the application. If you have low income, you can make applications for free lunch, right, at school. And I think sometimes free breakfast, which I think is a great step in the right direction. But at that time, I don't believe that was a thing because I think my mom would have applied for it. My dad, though, when my mom was bringing this up, that, she needed money to put into our school lunch accounts, my dad was appalled. My mom would even approach him with this. And, my mom couldn't understand why they didn't even have that amount of money so soon after he got a paycheck, which was a common thing, right? Like he would tell my mom, because my dad was in car sales. And then I think in his later years, or maybe not his later years, like before he died, but when I was young, he worked as a car salesman. And then he eventually went into the finance part. So he was kind of one of the finance guys at the dealership. But he would estimate, he would give my mom estimates. I think this is how much you can expect for my paycheck to be. And it seemed like it was just never what he had told her. And my mom would be devastated, which I understand. Things were tight. Eventually they had 6 kids. That's a lot to provide for. And, so she would try to plan on his paycheck being this amount. which was still going to make things tight. It wasn't like, oh, and then we'll be comfortable. No, his paycheck was always still going to make us tight, but then it would be a little bit less than that, or, just less than that. And it would freak my mom out. Like I think she, like looking back, I think she would go into like this panic mode, which I have read things and heard people talk about how financial stress is one of the biggest stressors on us because it feels like a survival issue, right? It feels like a survival stress. And so my mom, I think, would just go into this panic, which didn't help my dad's attitude at all, right? It typically just resulted in this huge blow up between the two of them, with my dad leaving, getting mad, storming out the door, peeling out of the driveway in his car. And, that scenario repeated most paydays. I think his payday was once a month. And typically that always happened. So, that's what happened this time. He would get mad. He got really mad at her and was like, well, that's just what it is. It's only that. Now I'll fast forward just a minute. Because, at my dad's funeral, one of the guys he had worked with over the years, for several years, like this guy knew my dad. He spoke at my dad's funeral. And one of the things he said, right, I think I've done an episode on this before. It's not like I haven't put this out there, but one of the things he talked about, he started out his talk saying, if anyone knew Mike McAdams, you knew that there were 4 things that he loved. And I remember him starting that talk, and I was like, I think when my dad died, I was in my late 30s, maybe like 37, 38, something like that. And I kind of like sat back on the bench, and like kind of looked at my husband, and I'm thinking to myself, I couldn't tell you those 4 things. So, I'll learn a couple of things about my dad here in this talk, which I did learn some things about my dad. One of the things that he talked about was how much my dad loved Wendover, and how how my dad would drive to Wendover every morning before work, and often he would go back after work. And I never knew that. I don't think my mom knew that. So to me, I'm sitting there thinking, well, this explains the discrepancy in the paycheck, why he would say it was going to be this amount, and instead it would be this amount. And it explained why he went to work so early in the morning when he worked at a car dealership. Like, he would leave the house between 6 and 6:30 every morning, and he would get home 11:30, sometimes midnight. And, I remember being a teenager or young adult and kind of putting together that, like, car dealerships, I don't think they open that early, nor do I think they're closed that late, nor do I think one person would have to work that entire shift. So I knew there was a discrepancy. And I think I had even asked my mom about it. And, she just kind of dismissed me, and like, I knew not to bring it up again. So I'm sitting there at the funeral, and I'm like, oh, okay, that explains some holes in my family narrative. So, okay, now let's go back. So back into this story. Eventually my dad would storm out of the house, leaving his car. And on this particular day, on his way out, he said to my mom, "Good luck feeding these bastards." Now, I was young enough. I don't even think I had ever heard that word before. I certainly had no idea what it meant. But I could tell by how he said it that it was not good. And I remember like thinking to myself, like, I am not a bastard, which I'm not. My parents were married, right? I was his child. So there's that, right? Just these basic needs for food at school. Yes, could my parents have done home lunch? Yeah, I don't know why they did. I'm guessing school lunch and home lunch were probably comparable. I know when my kids were going through elementary school, and lunch had changed, right? School lunch had changed. Like I remember when I was growing up, the lunch ladies, that's what we called them, like the cooks, would get there at the school super early and start working on lunch. And then, they get it all cleaned up and they leave like maybe around, I don't know, 2 o'clock in the afternoon. And lunch was good. I mean, there were things I did not like, but lunch was good. And, that had changed by the time my kids were going to school, where most lunch was just packaged and reheated. And my kids did not like school lunch. So we did home lunch for all of my kids in elementary school. And I don't know that it was any cheaper than school lunch, but my kids would eat it, which often if I had paid for a school lunch, they wouldn't eat it. So I knew that they would at least eat a home packed lunch. Okay, so I'm going to wrap up this episode for those of you who are not Patreon members. And I would recommend looking at Pia Melody's Facing Codependence. You can even do a Google search and find, like, some people have written blog posts about what she writes about with needs and wants. I bet you could even find some quotes from the book, The Way Google Works. That's not a guarantee, but you can look up and you can see, what Pia Melody talked about, wrote about in terms of both needs and wants. I think oftentimes, still today, I think we talk about needs like it's okay to have needs. These basic needs, food, clothing, shelter, that type of stuff. But, I think still there can be that attitude of like, wants are just greedy, right? And wants are not necessary. And I like that Pia Melody talks about how wants serve a different purpose than needs. And wants are also important in our development and developing maybe healthy relationships with, I don't think she goes into this, but I think our issues about how wants are dealt with as kids plays into our issues around finances, issues around shopping, issues around interdependency in relationships. I think it factors into some trust issues. So again, I think wants actually, yes, I agree with her. They are different than needs, but I also think wants are an important part of our development. So, okay, that's going to do it for those of you who are not Patreon members. Thanks for listening. And remember that your story matters. And I will talk to you in the next episode. Okay, for those of you that are Patreon members, thank you so much for supporting the podcast in this way, for supporting me. I truly, truly appreciate it. So getting back into, wants and needs, how, yes, they serve different purposes in our development, but both are, I think, important for healthy development. So gonna pick back up with this story that I was talking about. Not exactly with that story, but I'm just gonna kind of continue in my thought process. So again, I think my mom felt shame about not being able to provide for my wants and needs as a kid. I think she really felt bad putting that stress onto my 12-year-old self of having to earn money to buy my own school clothes. I was talking to a friend the other day and I was talking about this, because I knew I was going to talk about this, do a podcast episode about this. And, I had just had my birthday. We were at lunch together and I was talking about this. And she asked me, she said, well, did the same thing happen to your older sister? Did she have to start buying all of her school clothes when she was 12? And it had never occurred to me. And I said, I have no idea. I have no idea. if she did, I don't know what she did to earn school clothes money. I have no idea. Like the first job I was aware that she got was at 16. Um, so I was like, yeah, I don't know if that was just a Jackie thing, or I don't, maybe my mom was trying to teach me a lesson that didn't land with me. I don't know. So that is a question I have no answer to. And yeah, I don't know. But I do think that, my mom probably felt bad putting that stress onto my 12-year-old self. None of my other, well, my two brothers after me. So again, I'm the second, and then two brothers after me. And they started working probably around 14 at, in where I lived, there was a farmer who had a bunch of different farmland in different areas, some in our city, some in a couple of other cities. It was called Pack Farm. Their last name was Pack. Not related to the Pack family that I married into. But so both of my brothers did work at Pack Farm when I think they started at like 14. And, they just kind of plant, they'd pick, they'd harvest, all of that type of stuff. So they would work summers into the fall, doing like farm work. And then both of my brothers eventually, I'm talking like maybe 16. They got jobs, with fast food or with different companies, movie theaters, stuff like that. But then during the summertime, there was a guy in our neighborhood who did a lot of remodeling, reconstruction kind of stuff he did it mostly on like hotels. And so there was a summer that he had asked them both to work with him, and they remodeled several hotels up in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. And so they would go up to Jackson Hole Monday through Friday, come home for the weekend, leave Sunday night to head back up to Jackson Hole. So, they also worked. I'm not sure if they had to buy their own school clothes with that money, or I'm not sure exactly what they did with that money, but my two younger brothers did have to work. And then the youngest two, my younger sister and my youngest brother, my youngest sibling, I don't know. I don't think my sister had jobs much until she was older, like maybe even graduated high school. And I don't know about my youngest brother. So I do think my mom had not worked through her own issues around her wants and needs. I think my dad, on the other hand, he hadn't worked through his own issues about his wants and needs, but I think he took more. He definitely had issues with finances. His father, my grandpa, he would gamble from time to time. Often, so my grandfather, my grandpa McAdams, was from Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and grew up there. And so I think often when he went back to Louisiana, which they did I think twice a year, they would go back to Louisiana with family, hang out with his brothers, things like that. And I think he would go on the river boats and gamble then. I think my grandpa was financially well off, and I think he often won gambling. And I don't believe that's what my dad did, but I think my dad, I don't know. I don't know why my dad, but he obviously did not work through his issues around finances. And so I don't think he felt a lot of shame taking money for himself and basically kind of wasting it, because I don't know that he ever really won enough at gambling or won it all back at gambling. And he just didn't feel any shame about that. Like nobody knew that, right? Until this coworker of his mentioned it at his funeral. Because I even talked to my mom after that. I was like, were you aware of this? No, she wasn't. And so, he just kept that secret and did whatever he wanted. And and was somewhat, I think, selfish and shameless in that way. So I don't think either of my parents had worked through their own issues around their wants and needs. I think my mom was feeling trapped in a marriage that wasn't healthy. She was trapped in a financial situation that was less than what was needed, in a country that didn't see men and women equally, and with religious beliefs that, stigmatized divorce, encouraged staying married. And instead of her working through her issues around all of that, which I can agree is a lot, I think she shamed me, or pointed the finger at me. Now, eventually, my mom did go back to work. She had a degree in elementary education, and she went back to work. Primarily at the time, she talked about, because my dad would move jobs quite often. I'm guessing he got fired a lot. My dad had a temper. I'm guessing he wasn't an easy person to work with. And so often our insurance was sporadic. And my mom had, chronic health issues. She had Crohn's disease. And so at that time too, insurance could not cover you if you had pre-existing conditions. So with my dad, having to switch jobs, start a new insurance plan, my mom had this pre-existing condition. She usually couldn't get on the insurance plan for like a year, if at all. And so eventually she went back to school, and, because it was insurance on herself, she was able to have health insurance, and it was continuous, right? It wasn't sporadic. She couldn't be denied because of a pre-existing condition because the insurance was in her name. So at the time, that was, one of the reasons she gave for going back to work was being able to carry life insurance. But I'm sure it also helped to have some stable income, because my dad's was just not predictable or stable. So I think some of that she put onto me. She definitely thought I was wrong for caring so much about name brands. I was called vain for caring so much about what other people thought of me. And she just didn't think I was being very practical. But like I said, I'm still that way today. And my mom and I always saw that particular situation differently up until she died. My mom would opt for quantity, and I would opt for quality. And I don't know that we really ever saw eye to eye on that. When my mom passed away, she had lived in that home since I was 3 years old. We moved into that home when I was 3. And, we kind of cleaned it out and sold it after my mom's death in 2014. So she lived there for a long time. And, once we were all out of the house and she was kind of this empty nester, single woman living in the house by herself, she had every closet in the house, which, it was a small house, but there was her bedroom, another one upstairs, 2 downstairs. So this 4-bedroom home, and every closet was full of her clothes. And they weren't quality clothes. She wouldn't get rid of any, but she did keep buying them because they weren't very expensive. She would buy some. She, had a lot of shoes, things like that. She had a lot of clothing and shoes and things like that, but they may not last very long. They might lose their shape. The shoes might start to be scuffed, or what's it called? The heel of the shoe would kind of wear easily. But she would keep them. She kept a lot of things. And so, like I said, we just never saw eye to eye on that. So that's the background. I wanted to just give you that context. Oh, let me add one more thing. I would also say for most of my adult life, I continued this pattern. Like on my birthday, I would buy myself the birthday gift that I wanted. And it would frustrate my husband every year. And he would ask me, why are you buying yourself gifts when it's so close to your birthday? And my birthday is typically also around Mother's Day. So like this year, my birthday was the day before Mother's Day, which means next year it'll be on Mother's Day, which I don't really like. I think Mother's Day was also a really hard day growing up for us, Mother's Day and Father's Day. And I just kind of got that, like, if my birthday was on Mother's Day or even the day before Mother's Day or the day after Mother's Day, it was kind of overshadowed by Mother's Day and my mom's, I don't know, feelings of inadequacy that came up, or she was just never in a good mood on Mother's Day, I feel like. And so that's just kind of, it's not like this year it was fine to have my birthday the day before Mother's Day, but there's a part of me deep inside that I still kind of cringe when my birthday is right there close to Mother's Day. So, you know, when my husband would get frustrated, like, why are you buying this? It's so close to both your birthday and Mother's Day. Why are you buying your own gifts instead of like letting us buy them, right? Now, I have to say too, and this is somewhat vulnerable too, my husband and I have talked about this because, as is the case in a lot of relationships, I had my issues, right? And I just kind of laid out this backstory. I mean, I could have probably given more stories, but I think I gave you a good idea of what I was talking about. And my husband had his issues, right? He grew up just down the street from me, and his family was not wealthy either. You know, when he was young, his dad worked, but his dad was a blue collar worker, belonged to the union. His mom didn't work. I think when, you know, he was like in high school, his mom started working at a telemarketing place. She worked, like, we had a pretty big center for JCPenney's, ordering from their catalog. And so his mom worked there, just kind of taking orders and stuff like that when he was in high school. So, you know, like I said, sometimes this is where relationships get complicated because my issues are now converging with my husband's issues. And there were birthdays that he didn't do anything for me, right? And there were Mother's Days that he didn't do anything. And there were years when my birthday was on Mother's Day. And, you know, one of my last kids, well, 3 of my kids were born in April. So my last one was born in April. She was a month old, a little over a month old, when it's my birthday on Mother's Day. And he did nothing, right? And I would feel hurt. I think he felt bad. I mean, I know he felt bad. We've talked about that. I just never quite knew why that happened. Because that's not really his character, right? He is a thoughtful person. He does care about those things. But that happened multiple times. And I would kind of ask him, like, why? And he would kind of say, well, you're just so hard to buy for. And again, it goes back to that, like, you're so picky, or you're so this, or you're so, and I never saw myself as picky. Yes, I wanted certain clothing items, certain kinds of shoes, certain things like that. But I'm also pretty thankful or grateful for anybody thinking of my birthday and getting me anything. I'm pretty happy about that. And, you know, sometimes I thought, like, this way I can buy my own gift. And then I've kind of checked the box on what I want. And that makes me happy to get whatever anybody else gives me. Because again, being thought of, being, you know, people putting any time or effort into any type of gift means something to me, more so than the gift. And I would tell him this, and, you know, it would happen again 2 years later. Like, it was hit and miss. Sometimes he would get me things for my birthday or Mother's Day, sometimes not. And so, you know, he would say that, like, why are you buying gifts for yourself right around your birthday or right around Mother's Day? But then sometimes too, if I left it up for him to buy me something, he wouldn't, right? And again, we have talked about this, and that pattern has pretty much changed. And he is much better with my birthday. He's much better with Mother's Day. So are my kids. You know, it was, I mean, we had talked about this, like, every time this happened, right? Every time he didn't do anything for my birthday or Mother's Day, we would have a conversation about it. And he knew it hurt my feelings. And one day, This probably would have been maybe 5 or 6 years ago, probably around 6 years ago. I don't even remember where we were, but we were talking. It might have been with our kids. It might have been with somebody else. We were just kind of talking, and my husband just mentioned, for my birthday, his birthday is in August. And he said, my dad was a union guy, and they went on strike every 2 years, maybe every 3 years, my dad would go on strike. And if they went on strike, the talk of starting the strike always happened like end of July, first part of August. And he's like, so whenever my dad was on strike, it went over my birthday, right? Or they knew they were headed into strike as my birthday was approaching. And he's like, and so, that year I wouldn't get anything for my birthday. And it's not like once my dad was back working, I had a different birthday or they made up for my birthday. He's like, the attitude was just kind of like, hey, bud, thanks for taking one for the team. And so he was just like, yeah. And I mean, that didn't happen to any of my siblings. My siblings always had birthday gifts, but often my birthday was just skipped. And it wasn't really like, first they would kind of talk about it. And then it just was like, I knew that if my dad was on strike, I wasn't going to get anything. And we didn't even talk about it anymore. And so whatever that setting was where he was sharing that, we left and we came home. And I think probably that night we're laying in bed. And I said to him, like, I feel like I know you really well, but I didn't know that. Like, I have never heard that story before. I never knew. I mean, I knew your dad went on strikes and fairly, regularly. I never knew that they always were either starting around the time of your birthday or they were going to be starting. So you're leading into a strike, which then his parents, were careful about spending money, or that your dad was on strike for your birthday. And, he was like, I've never mentioned that. And I'm like, no, like, I had no idea you could just pull this story out. And I'm like, but it makes sense. It actually makes sense because I'm like, I think I've seen you freeze when it's my birthday or when it's Mother's Day. You often freeze and then you don't do anything. And I'm like, it makes more sense because that was probably some of what was going on for your birthday. Your birthday, they didn't do anything. And it wasn't like they made it up to you or they really talked it through with you. They were just like, it is what it is. And I'm like, that makes sense to me, actually, about why so many times you haven't gotten me anything or you have frozen when it comes time for my birthday or Mother's Day. And I will say, since then, and with that awareness and with that knowledge, he's done much better. He hasn't skipped a birthday for me at all. I still have, continued my pattern of buying gifts. And, he doesn't really say to me anymore, like, why do you do that with your birthday coming up? Because he knows that I don't always know if he's getting me something. So again, now this is some of the realization I had with my birthday this past month. So, the way I saw it growing up, the way I saw it into my adult years, I took care of what I wanted, and that just meant I wouldn't be disappointed. And I could avoid that feeling of being disappointed, because it doesn't feel good, by just taking care of my own needs. So let's come back to my birthday this past year, last month. I had already bought what I wanted for my birthday. Now, it hadn't come yet, and I had gotten an email saying that the shipment was delayed and they didn't have an approximate date as to when it would be shipped. But I had already purchased it. So we went to dinner for my birthday. It was on a Saturday, and we're back at the house, and I'm opening my birthday gifts. And I have to say, everyone did great. My kids did great. My spouse did great. They got me the things I would want, what I liked. And I opened the gift from my husband, and it was the exact same thing I had bought for myself, except he had bought the more expensive option. And obviously it had arrived in a timely way. And so he had it to give me. And I didn't have what I had bought myself. I did tell him, I told my husband, I bought the same thing for myself, but it just hasn't arrived yet. And, he kind of rolls his eyes and I kind of laugh. And one of my kids, again, my kids are aware I have these issues around gifts and what I want, stuff like that. So one of my kids, again, I was very grateful for all the things they gave me, and I really was happy with what they gave me. And so one of my kids asked, like, Mom, what presents did you get? Like, what kind of birthday presents did you get when you were growing up? And I said, well, starting about the age of 12, I would get like different pieces of silverware. I might get dishes. Eventually I would get like I might get one place setting at a time of dinnerware, like a dinner plate, a salad plate, and a bowl. I might get an outfit that I had picked out. And that was just a pretty typical birthday for me, right? I got silverware, maybe some plates and dishes, serving dishes eventually, like pots and pans. I got those types of things, right? And I guess I had never really told my kids this, or I hadn't really told my spouse this before. My kids were shocked. And they were like, did you want those things? And I was like, no, not really. And they were like, well, why would your mom give you that? And I said, well, I think it was like for a hope chest kind of thing. I never actually had a hope chest, but my mom would say things like, and then when you get married, you'll already have a full set of silverware. You're already going to have these dishes and cups. By the way, when I moved out and went to college, I couldn't take any of that with me because that's not what it was for. And I could use much cheaper stuff to go to college. I didn't need these things. It's not like she was giving me china or anything like that, but, I couldn't use it when I went to college, just when I got married. And my kids asked, so were you happy when eventually you got married and you had all of those things? And I said, well, I wouldn't say I was happy. I wasn't like, oh my gosh, I'm so grateful I have all these things already. But okay, we had silverware and pots and pans and 2 sets of dishes that we didn't need to buy ourselves. And so as my kids were asking these questions and I'm answering, I'm starting to connect dots and I'm understanding myself at a level I hadn't previously. Seeing my kids' responses connected me to my own emotions from years ago that I would have never expressed, or maybe even not consciously been aware of. Of course, I didn't want to get silverware or dishes or pots and pans. Now, maybe now as an adult, I enjoy cooking, and I will say I'm a pretty good cook, and I love having a good set of pots and pans. But I was not there as a teenager. I didn't want silverware. I didn't want dishes or pots and pans as a teenager. But I would smile. I would feign interest and excitement because that is what my mom wanted. And that is what my mom needed. So the other thing I realized as I was emailing the company that I had bought my birthday gift from to ask them about returning instructions or possibly canceling my order, I just realized that as I've been taking care of my wants and needs all these years by myself, I also wasn't allowing any different storyline. I wasn't trusting anybody else in my life to get me the things they knew I would like and want. And again, that's not completely up to me. Like, my husband had his own issues that he brought into our relationship, as everybody does. We all bring our own baggage in, and we have to sort through that. We have to work through that, right? But there had been probably, again, 5 or 6 years since we had had that conversation about what happened for his birthday, when he realized and had been doing better. And I still wasn't allowing myself to have any different storyline. I wasn't trusting the other people in my life to get me gifts that I would want or what I would like, or to know me and to know the things that I would like. So after my birthday, which was on a Sunday, when I got back into the office, I pulled out my book, Facing Codependence, and I went to chapter 4, where Pia talks about a child's wants and needs. And I also turned to chapter 6, where she talks about the emotional damage of abuse and carried shame. Pia Melody says, this mutual meeting of needs and wants is called interdependence. I can take care of others' needs. I can respond and even anticipate the wants and needs of my kids and my spouse. But she also writes on page 72, after she outlines the elements of needs and wants that a child has, she writes, all of these elements are important parts of every person's dependency needs. And reading that, like I've read this book from cover to cover, like 5 different times, right? But just going back and referring to this chapter, I don't think, like the way that was worded, like everybody has dependency needs. And I was never aware. I never read that in this book before. And I don't think dependency ever felt safe for me as I was growing up. I don't know if I realized every person has dependency needs, and that isn't being needy or in a clingy way, in a bad way. That it's just the other part of interdependence. And without having worked through my issues of dependency, or my having accepted dependency needs, I couldn't actually be interdependent. You know, others can ask me for things they want and need, and I can support them in ways that I can. And that I could rely on others for what I want and need. Like I knew the one part of that. I just hadn't really ever connected the dot to the second part of that. And particularly this past year, when my husband got me the exact same thing I had bought myself, except a nicer model. I guess prior to that, I hadn't really connected the dots that if I wanted to change this storyline, which, let's be honest, is not a great storyline, then I had to start working on my dependency needs, which meant I had to start trusting others. I had to start depending on them in ways that made me uncomfortable, in ways that were so different from what I had learned and what I had been doing. And it just dawned on me that the beauty of interdependence is that it highlights the interconnectedness of all things. And maybe for me, I could see that, but not fully be a part of that. Interdependence shows us that our actions and our choices have ripple effects beyond what we can imagine. And I think that's a beautiful thing. And I just wanted to share that with you. I hope that this maybe sparks some ideas for you around maybe your own wants and needs storyline, and your relationship with your dependency needs. At the end of this episode, I want to remind you that your story matters. Remember, there's something meaningful in every chapter. Don't wait to share your story until it's finished. Until next time, Jackie.